Hello everyone, this is Alan Gotro, your host of True Crime Man's Dark Imagination. If you like what you see, hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you'll be notified of any future programming. I'd like to start this episode off by dedicating it to my only brother, Richard J. Gotro, who passed away sadly on December 15th of 2021, just 3 days after his wife, believe it or not. Butch, wherever you are, I hope Mom and Dad are taking care of you. I miss you terribly, and one day we'll see each other again. In an attempt to rid the Russian Empire of someone viewed as a demonic influence upon the monarchy, on December 30th, 1916, those loyal to the crown hatched a plot to rid this person's influence from the planet. His intended killers poisoned him and shot him, and finally he drowned. But he refused to die during the first few attempts. What brought this figure so much power over the Russian royal family? Was there a mystical quality to this peasant monk from Siberia that exerted control over the powerful rulers of Russia? Or were his mystical powers and influence over-exaggerated by those who opposed him? This is the story of one man's impact on the 300-year-old Romanov throne, thus forcing the government to eventually abdicate and sealing their fate. In the latter part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was seen as weak and autocratic. Ever since the disastrous defeat of the Russian forces in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, the military struggled to regain the confidence of the Russian people. Nicholas II had taken command of the armies during World War I, and their dismal performance at the front clamored for his removal. Political ideologies began to rise swiftly that called for a total annihilation of the monarchy. In its place would come the Bolsheviks. Under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks sought to unite the country under a single socialist-type government that catered more to the workers of the nation rather than the elites, spouting this as the only way to rid the country of the old Romanov dynasty, while at the same time ending Russia's participation in the First World War, a conflict that proved to be the ruin of several monarchies by its end. Through this internal struggle, the likes of a seemingly mystical power that cast an unhealthy influence over the Romanov family reared its head. Seen as a threat to the proper administration of the country, Grigory Rasputin stood on the precipice of being known as the man who ruled Russia. But was this the truth, or merely propaganda in favor of the Bolsheviks and a new form of government? Born in 1869 in relative obscurity to a peasant family in Siberia, Grigory Rasputin didn't show much inclination to religion early on in his life. His spiritual awakening came after visiting a monastery at 23 years old. Though he never took the holy orders, he rose to prominence as a mystical religious figure, more like an Old Testament prophet than a Russian Orthodox priest. Dressed in dirty monk's robes and unconcerned with personal hygiene, Rasputin would be the last person you would expect to be invited to attend the aristocratic events of St. Petersburg's elite. But he was a singular, unique figure in the then capital of the Russian Empire. Employing a legendary force of will, some called Rasputin's personality hypnotic, while others thought he wielded some dark, sinister magic. Rasputin climbed his way up the social ladder very quickly. In the early 1900s, Rasputin's charismatic vibe began to spread in Siberia. At some point between 1903 and 1905, he traveled to the city of Kazan, where he became known as a wise and discerning holy man who could help people relieve their spiritual crises. He made a favorable impression on many high-ranking church officials of Kazan who recommended him to Bishop Sergei for a position in the St. Petersburg Theological Seminary, of which Sergei was the rector. Upon arriving in St. Petersburg and meeting Bishop Sergei, Rasputin was introduced to the church leaders, wealthy and influential men. That is how he made his way into the supremely chic and select circles where the aristocracy gathered to discuss religious matters. During his social rise to power, some of those men he met were among his earliest followers. It wasn't until the 1st of November 1905 that Rasputin would meet Tsar Nicholas II in the Peterhof Palace. This event is recorded in the Tsar's diary. Alexandra and I made the acquaintance of a man of God, Grigory, from Tobolsk province. Rasputin's influence on the royal family stemmed from the belief of Alexandra and her court that he could ease the pain of her son and stop his bleeding, the Tsarevich, Alexei. He had hemophilia. The Tsarina had a passionate attachment to Rasputin due to this belief, and thus he became an indispensable member of the royal entourage. During the summer of 1912, Tsarevich Alexei developed an extremely bad hemorrhage which caused a large hematoma. He appeared to be close to death to the point where, in desperation, Alexandra sent a telegram to Rasputin, who was in Siberia, to pray for Alexei. Shortly after, Rasputin wrote back, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." 2 days later, Alexei's bleeding stopped. Dr. Fedorov, one of the doctors who examined the prince, said that the recovery was wholly inexplicable from a medical point of view. However, he later admitted that Alexandra shouldn't be blamed for believing Rasputin to be a miracle man. When Tsarina Alexandra gave birth to her only son, Alexei, doctors discovered that he was a severe hemophiliac. The Russian people, already hostile to the German-born Tsarina, learned of the new heir's debilitating condition and blamed the Tsarina for the boy's affliction, causing the Tsarina considerable mental and emotional distress for the rest of her life. Unable to find doctors who could cure her son's condition or even alleviate the symptoms, the Tsarina put her faith in Rasputin when he stepped forward and promised that he could treat the sickly child's symptoms through prayer and faith healing. To this day, no one knows what Rasputin did to treat Alexei, whether it was folk medicine, magic, or some sort of placebo effect. It appeared to work. While Alexei's condition wasn't cured, Rasputin, and only Rasputin, was able to moderate the boy's symptoms. Rasputin's ability to treat Alexei's hemophilia made him indispensable to the Romanovs, and Rasputin knew it, exploiting his position to gain greater control over them. Rasputin was soon appointed as the Tsar's lamplighter, keeping the lamps that burned in front of religious icons in the palace lit and thus having regular access to the court and the royal family. He used his newfound power to full effect, accepting bribes in the forms of money and sexual favors that expanded his influence. This power made him a controversial figure in Imperial Russia. His enemies accused him of religious heresy and rape, having an unholy influence on the Tsar, and even having an affair with the Tsarina. First, the opposition grew within the church. The clergy at his hometown quickly denounced him as a heretic, a charlatan, and as having used his influence to spread false doctrines. Then, even more prominent figures opposed Rasputin publicly. Prime Minister Peter Stolypin and the Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police, ordered an investigation into his activities. However, they were unsuccessful in barring him from St. Petersburg, and he remained a prominent, influential figure inside the royal family. In 1909, one of his female aristocratic followers accused him of rape. As early as 1910, rumors of Rasputin assaulting his female followers and other female figures in his life, including the Tsar's youngest daughters Olga and Tatiana, were all over the press. World War I, the crumbling state of feudalism, and government bureaucracy contributed to Russia's declining economy at the quickest rate. Many blamed Alexandra and Rasputin because he influenced her and the Tsar, who was often away at the front. As enthralled as the Romanovs were, the Russian people were not. and soon pinned every calamity on Rasputin's scheming, and it was largely justified. Rasputin had no idea how to run a country, and the advice he gave to the Romanovs was dutifully followed as if it were religious instructions, which usually ended in disaster. It wasn't long before rumors were published in the press that Rasputin was the Tsarina's lover, and that he was bewitching the Romanovs with some form of dark magic. Soon, the Tsar's nephew by marriage, Prince Felix Yusupov, came to the conclusion that only Rasputin's death would end his control of the Romanovs and restore the legitimacy of the Russian monarchy, which was quickly becoming destroyed by Rasputin's actions. Conspiring with other prominent monarchists, including the Tsar's cousin, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and Vladimir Purishkevich, a deputy in the Duma, Russia's powerless legislative body, Yusupov set out to kill Rasputin and save the Russian monarchy from collapse. In a memoir written many years after the fact, Yusupov provides a riveting first-hand account of the protracted assassination of Rasputin at his estate in St. Petersburg. Having arranged to meet together for pastries and wine at his estate, Yusupov picked up Rasputin from his home and brought him to the palace. To justify eating in the cellar, which had been soundproofed for the occasion, his hidden co-conspirators played records in a closed-off room on the main floor to convince Rasputin that Yusupov's wife was hosting a small party. This ruse worked, and the two went down to a furnished cellar to eat, drink, and converse about politics. Yusupov offered Rasputin pastries, and soon Rasputin began gorging himself on the cakes that had been laced with cyanide. Chosen specifically because they were known to be Rasputin's favorite, so were the most likely to be eaten by him. Worried that the cyanide, which typically kills almost instantly, didn't seem to be working, Yusupov invited Rasputin to have a glass of Madeira, pouring the wine into one of several glasses that had been laced with cyanide. Rasputin declined the glass at first, but Rasputin's gluttony for wine quickly won out, and he drank several glasses of wine from poisoned glasses. One of Yusupov's co-conspirators, a doctor, had prepared each dose of cyanide very carefully to ensure that everyone was strong enough to kill, not just one, but several men. Yusupov began to panic as Rasputin appeared to consume enough cyanide to kill scores of men. As Rasputin started to have some difficulty swallowing his wine, Yusupov feigned concern and asked Rasputin if he was feeling ill.
Yes, my head is heavy, and I have a burning sensation in my stomach,
Rasputin replied, before saying that more wine would be an adequate cure. Using a noise upstairs as an opportunity to excuse himself, Yusupov left the cellar to confer with his co-conspirators, who were shocked that Rasputin had resisted the effects of the poison. Though they offered to go down as a group in order to overpower and strangle Rasputin to death, Yusupov decided that he should return alone and shoot Rasputin with a revolver instead. Upon returning, Yusupov found Rasputin slumping in his chair and struggling to breathe. Soon, however, Rasputin appeared to recover and became more energetic. Fearing that the poison had failed, Yusupov stood up and paced the room to work up the nerve to shoot Rasputin. Rasputin stood up as well and appeared to admire the furnishings that Yusupov had brought down into the cellar. Seeing Yusupov stare at a crystal crucifix on the wall, Rasputin commented on the cross, then turned away to look at an ornate cabinet on the other side of the room. Yusupov told Rasputin, "You'd far better look at the crucifix and say a prayer." At this, Rasputin turned to Yusupov for several tense moments of silence. He came quite close to me and looked me full in the face. It was as though he had at last read something in my eyes, something he had not expected to find. I realized that the hour had come. "O Lord," I prayed, "give me the strength to finish it." Yusupov pulled out the revolver and, firing one shot, hit Rasputin in the chest. Rasputin cried out and collapsed onto the floor, where he laid in a growing pool of blood, but did not move. Alerted by the gunshot, Yusupov's co-conspirators rushed downstairs. The doctor checked for Rasputin's pulse and found none, confirming that Rasputin was dead, shot close enough to his heart to be immediately fatal. The conspirators quickly set about establishing their cover story and separated into two groups, with Yusupov staying at Moika with the Duma deputy, Perishkovich. Before long, however, Yusupov started feeling uneasy. He excused himself and went back down into the basement to check on Rasputin's body. It laid motionless, exactly where he left it, but Yusupov wanted to be sure. He shook the body and didn't see any signs of life, at first. Then Rasputin's eyelids started to twitch, just before Rasputin opened them. I then saw both eyes, the green eyes of a viper, staring at me with an expression of diabolical hatred. Rasputin lunged at Yusupov, snarling like an animal and digging his fingers into Yusupov's neck. Yusupov was able to fight Rasputin off and push him away. Yusupov ran up the stairs to the first floor, yelling to Perishkovich, to whom he had earlier given the revolver. "Quick, quick, come down, he's still alive." Reaching the landing on the first floor, Perishkovich joined him, revolver in hand. Looking down the steps, they saw Rasputin clawing his way up the stairs on his hands and knees, heading toward a side door leading out into the courtyard. This devil who was dying of poison, who had a bullet in his heart, must have been raised from the dead by the powers of evil. There was something appalling and monstrous in his diabolical refusal to die. Rasputin shoved the door open and ran out into the courtyard. Terrified of what would happen if Rasputin got away and returned to the Tsarina, the two men gave chase. Perishkovich was the first out of the door, and he immediately fired 2 shots at the fleeing Rasputin. He missed. But then Perishkovich chased down the wounded Rasputin, and from just feet away fired 2 more shots. One of the shots struck Rasputin in the head, and he collapsed to the ground. Yusupov had 2 loyal servants wrap Rasputin's body in heavy carpets and tied with heavy chains. The conspirators then brought the body to a bridge over the Neva River and dumped it into an unfrozen patch of water below. After everything that happened, he ultimately died of hypothermia in the freezing water. Shortly before he was shot in Yusupov's cellar, Rasputin, maybe knowing he was about to die or maybe just boasting, told Yusupov that he would ultimately prevail against his enemies who were plotting to kill him.
The aristocrats can't get used to the idea that a humble peasant should be welcome in the imperial palace. They are consumed with envy and fury. But I am not afraid of them. Disaster will come to anyone who lifts a finger against me.
Rasputin's words proved to be prophetic. In the hours after the assassination, Yusupov was filled with hope. Rasputin's death was being openly celebrated in the press, violating the emergency censorship restrictions barring mention of the murder, and publicly celebrated in the streets. The country was with us, full of confidence in the future. The papers published enthusiastic articles in which they claimed that Rasputin's death meant the defeat of the powers of evil and held out golden hopes for the future. The Tsarina knew that Yusupov, Pavlovich, and Perishkovich had killed Rasputin, even before Rasputin's body was found, confirming that he was actually dead. But she couldn't prove it. With their connections to the imperial family, the Tsarina's suspicions weren't enough to prosecute the men. All the Tsarina could do was convince the Tsar to exile Yusupov and Pavlovich from St. Petersburg. Yusupov soon grew disillusioned, however, when the restoration that Rasputin's death was supposed to inspire never materialized. For many years, he realized, Rasputin had by his intrigues demoralized the better elements in the government and had sown skepticism and distrust in the hearts of the people. Nobody wanted to take a decision, for nobody believed that any decision would be of any use. Without Rasputin to blame for the mismanagement and failures of the Russian state, the public could only blame the one person who was ultimately responsible for their suffering, Tsar Nicholas II. When the Russian people finally rose up in March 1917, it would not be in patriotic defense of the Tsar, as Yusupov had anticipated. Instead, it was to reject the very idea that there should be a Tsar at all.
During the course of Rasputin's life, there have been several myths which have been accepted as fact. History records these tales as myths, yet historians have discredited them. Rasputin in no way possessed any mystical powers. Although he appeared to have healed the Tsarevich of his hemophilia, Rasputin insisted that aspirin not be given to the child, thus ceasing the bleeding for a time. Rasputin had been portrayed as a sexual deviant, bedding many women, including the Tsarina. Although these exploits have been propagandized since his death, there exists no historical documentation that this was the case. Rasputin did belong or advocate the beliefs of the Kleist sect, which believed that only through sin could one seek commune with God. Rasputin was not the secret ruler of Russia, although his opinions did have quite the influence on Nicholas and Alexandra. He did not exert the amount of influence in the actual rule of the country. Rasputin was hard to kill. Although his assassination was well documented through time, with his intended assassins plying him with massive amounts of poison, an autopsy report after his death revealed that there was no poison in Rasputin's system. And Rasputin did not rise from the dead. He was already deceased when his body was thrown into the Malaya Nevka River. Allegedly, he was fished out by some passerby and noticed Rasputin was still breathing. The truth is that Rasputin's body had been in the river for days before the police discovered the frozen corpse. As a result of the Russian Revolution, on March 15, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne in favor of his brother Michael. In the next year, the Bolsheviks executed the Romanov family. Their burial site would not be found until at least 2003. Although Rasputin's influence over the royal family may have played a part in the population as a whole having contempt for the Romanovs, it is doubtful that he actually ruled the country. Of course, with someone so mystical as Rasputin and his powers, it was certain to go down in history as having some sort of supernatural connotations. If you would like to support the channel, we are on PayPal, GoFundMe, and BuyMeACupOfCoffee.com. We also have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Rumble.com. Oh yeah, and also we're on TikTok now, believe it or not. There are a couple of videos up there that I've placed so that people can watch it. Just look for True Crime Historian, and you'll find me there. Until next time.